Ladies and gentlemen, somebody will make this work for me.
Mine's on.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies or gentlemen, gentlemen or ladies, ladies or gentlemen. What am I doing wrong, guys? There you are. Hi, everybody. Sorry to interrupt your lunch. I'm Chris Sands, and I want to introduce you to. This works. Is this working now? Yeah. It's good. Yeah.
This one is.
Yeah. No, we're fine. So I wanted to introduce you to my friend helping me with the technology, Matt Borges, who is the chairman of the Ohio Republican Party, a distinguished Ohioan, although a transplant from New England, and who works with Retzel and Associates, one of the leading firms here for strategic advising, public relations, communications, and the law. So a very strong firm. And actually, now that we have your attention, we're going to sit down. This is meant to be an informal conversation to sort of start things off. And I wanted to start with a very simple thank you for coming. So we're all interested in Canada-U.S. relations for a variety of reasons, professional and personal. What makes you interested in Canada? Or do you have a Canadian connection or a Canadian interest in your background that brought you here? Or are you just a friend of Dan's and you couldn't get away from it?
Well, I think this one's definitely on. I think it's more the latter. Happy to be here, and I wanted to say welcome to the home of the Stanley Cup since 1993. Although we have an NHL team here in Columbus, the Blue Jackets, you may have heard of them. They're usually down there at the bottom of the standings, and like the Canadian teams, we haven't won the Stanley Cup either. So. But one day we'll maybe get close. I always wonder how our friends in the North feel when the Stanley Cup resides in places like Raleigh, North Carolina, or Tampa Bay, or some other U.S. city, and places that have won the cup here over the last several years. But no, I'm delighted to be here. It's always a pleasure. I've had the opportunity to travel to Canada many times. I was up in Ottawa with Senator McCain when he was running for president in 2008. We caused a little bit of an international incident because we were, although he was a seated United States senator and a member of many important committees, we were technically on the campaign trail, and folks may remember there was a little bit of controversy around the fact that we had embassy support for that visit. The only problem that I ran into there was that the very next trip that we took, was down to Cartagena, Colombia, and because of the news that had gone through the State Department, the embassy in Colombia was told to give us no support whatsoever because it was a political event. And so, not speaking Spanish, that made my trip to Colombia just a little bit harder to execute, but we managed to pull it off without incident. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I appreciate the invitation and looking forward to our discussion.
Well, we have you tagged to provide good balance as a Republican, and it was interesting this year. We had so many Republican presidential candidates, and there was something of I guess for the governors, a kind of Canada primary where you saw early on a lot of candidates, Governor Walker from Wisconsin, Governor Perry from Texas, Governor Christie from New Jersey, going to Canada. I think Governor Bush also went up to Canada early on. He'd actually been a couple of times, not necessarily fundraising, but to talk to people and to show they could do international relations. For governors especially, do you think that there's a role for Canada as a stopping point or as a testing ground on foreign affairs?
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize our closest ally, our strongest partner on so many different issues, someone with whom we share a border, not one that I'm aware that anyone has proposed building a wall on, from what I know, although Bernie Sanders, you never know what would have happened there. But no, and I've been part of trips with, I've had the fortune good fortune in my life to work with presidents and vice presidents and candidates for president many times, and have done many, many foreign trips with those people. Now, in the Bush years, a lot of those trips were to the Middle East, did some G8 summits, had the opportunity to interact with folks from government leaders from around the world, including Canada, of course. And then I went with Mitt Romney on his campaign trip to Jerusalem in 2012, which was an amazing experience. But I think all candidates, when they get into the serious phase of their campaign, do want to demonstrate that they have some ability to handle themselves on the international stage. And it was why I was in Ottawa with Senator McCain. And the serious ones, I think, do take the opportunity to go do that. And I think it's important for us to go and make sure that we're presenting ourselves appropriately to our closest and strongest ally. Sure. On so many levels, our neighbors to the north. So yeah, that's been an important thing for our candidates to be able to do. Now, I happened to be very fond of one of our candidates that was in the race right up until about a month ago. He was the last one to get out of the Republican primaries. It was our governor, John Kasich, who I think has done a remarkable job, and I'm very, very proud of the campaign that he ran. We went out and fought very hard for him. We were able to carry Ohio. And if I had the opportunity to go and do it all over again tomorrow, I would do it in a minute. But we didn't get there. He isn't going to be the nominee. Maybe there'll be another time when we can revisit that possibility, but I think he would have been a very strong, and I continue to believe he would have been a strong and great candidate for our party and for our country moving forward. But that's unfortunately not how it all worked out.
I know politics isn't sports, and we all use sports shorthand, but no Republican has ever won the White House without winning Ohio.
That's right.
You, working with Governor Kasich and working in the state and living here, what's your sense of what Ohio's looking for in the presidency this year, and how do you think the candidates that have advanced or who look like they'll be their party's nominees, how do you think they resonate in a place like this?
So first, and I don't think this is any secret or any surprise, Ohio, of course, is the center of the political universe, really not just in the United States, but internationally. Every 4 years when we have one of these large political and cultural events, which is an election for President of the United States, it just has so much impact and resonates all over the world, and people in other countries will want to know, well, who's winning Ohio? Because that will tell them in all likelihood who's going to win the White House. Other than John F. Kennedy in 1960, we haven't had any example of a candidate who didn't carry Ohio and went on to win the White House, and even that election of Kennedy was under some scurrilous circumstances. He may not have won that election.
The vote count in West Virginia, as I recall.
A lot of dead people voted in Chicago that we weren't able to get the deceased vote out as robustly in Ohio that year for him, I guess, apparently. So, but like you said, no Republican has ever gotten to the White House without carrying Ohio. And so we're always the center of the political universe, and we know that as Ohioans, and in a weird way, I think in some way we've almost begun to take that for granted a bit. There's something along the lines, I don't remember the exact number, but in 2012, I believe we had, between the two candidates for president, I think we had something like 80 unique visits into the state to stop in here to campaign, whether it was President Obama, who was running for re-election, or Mitt Romney, and I think that also included the running mates, Joe Biden and Paul Ryan, respectively. And you live in a state that's very Republican, like Oklahoma, you'd never see the candidates come campaign there. I grew up in New England, as you mentioned, in Rhode Island, very, very Democratic, very blue, as we call it here. And you never see the candidates there, ever. They don't, because we already know who's going to win there. So they're fighting over really only a handful of states in the U.S., Ohio, Virginia, Florida, Iowa, New Hampshire, maybe you could argue Nevada and Colorado these days, although those are becoming more and more Democratic all the time. But really, those are the states that end up determining who the leader of the free world is. And so it becomes extremely important, and we do a lot of campaigning here. You may have noticed the candidates are already up on television with their ads. A lot of stuff for our United States Senator, who we're working very hard to reelect this year, and Rob Portman, and a lot of anti-Donald Trump ads that are also up on the airwaves already, and those are from groups that are, of course, supportive of Hillary Clinton's campaign. But the thing that I'm seeing right now, and what Ohioans are looking for, oddly enough, is a very, very large percentage, more so than you'd want right now, are unhappy with either choice. And about a quarter of the electorate right now is telling us that they wish there were somebody else that they could vote for. And they're not really excited about voting for either party's nominee. And so what that tells me in the business of elections and trying to win here is that it's really going to come down to which side does a better job of turning out their voters who fall into that 25% who really aren't excited about this election right now. And if people decide to stay home, if, say, 10% of the Republican base decides to stay home and not vote, we're going to lose a lot of races this year. And so it's up to the party infrastructure and the party apparatus to make sure that that doesn't happen. I did have the opportunity to have about a 40-minute phone conversation with Mr. Trump a couple of Saturdays ago, and it was, I will say I appreciate him taking the time to make the phone call and spend that much time on the phone with us talking about what it's going to take to win Ohio. At the time, he had not gotten into these criticisms of the judge and these other things that he's been doing, but I did get an opportunity to ask him about some things that he had said about a friend of our governor, someone who actually had come to Ohio to help the Ohio Republican Party campaign a few years ago, a Republican governor of a Democratic state in New Mexico named Susana Martinez, Latina woman. She's a former Democrat, a prosecutor, has a great story, and he had some not very kind things to say to her, and I asked him about those. And I think he's having some, hopefully, he's in the process of adapting to what's the difference between running in a primary election and running in a general election. So we'll see if he can pull that off. Those kinds of things are going to be very important for us to keep our base together, to keep our voters energized, and if he can back away from some of those kinds of things, we have a good opportunity here, because those numbers tell us that people really, really, really don't like the alternative either. And Hillary Clinton's negatives in Ohio are well-earned, well-deserved, they're very high, and it's because Ohioans have had a long, 25-year now relationship with the Clinton family and with her specifically, and they don't like her, they don't trust her. The number one word they associate with her is liar. And so I'm hoping that this doesn't devolve into a race to the bottom to try to win here because of who you won't vote for, who you like less. But in some ways, we're seeing something I've never quite seen before in the electorate in Ohio, and that is a major concern moving forward. I just want to, if you would indulge me for just a minute, I want to mention that on Sunday we lost a leader in Ohio who served our state as a United States Senator, served as a governor for 2 terms, was the mayor of the city of Cleveland, and held many other smaller offices. He was a lieutenant governor and a county auditor and a state representative by the name of George Voinovich. And he has a special place in my heart, because that's kind of where I got my start in Ohio politics from, was working with him when he was in the late stages of running for governor in 1990. He was the Republican mayor of Cleveland, which are words that we may never say in the same sentence again. But he was, and he was just a different kind of politician. And so, of course, when you get news like that and have to share news like that, you think about him and your relationship, but it also kind of took me back in time And I began to think about the friends that I met in that very first experience, some of whom are my very close friends, closest friends, still to this day, and what we really learned from someone like Senator Voinovich. And what I think that ultimately is whenever someone dies, I think they tend to be, you go out of your way to canonize and to reflect only on the positive, and sometimes that's for convenience sake. In this case, where he has some services that I'll be attending tomorrow and then a funeral on Friday, of course you'll hear and read a lot of the glowing remembrances and tributes to him, but these aren't feigned, these aren't false. This is someone who really, actually, truly was the embodiment of what it meant to be a public servant, and took that responsibility very seriously. Don't get me wrong; he was a political creature, and he was as tough of a campaigner as maybe Ohio has ever seen. But that wasn't his first priority. His first priority was running for a job he actually wanted to get something accomplished, getting in that job, trying to get it accomplished, making sure he always understood that he was there to be a servant to the public and to those voters, whether they supported him or not. And it does make you reflect and look back and say, where are the George Voinoviches today? It's not that they're not out there, it's just that I don't think right now we have a George Voinovich running for president. And I'd like for us somehow to begin to recapture that spirit. In Ohio here over the last couple of years now, we've lost some of the real political legends in our state. My predecessor, who was the chairman of the Ohio Republican Party for 24 years, named Bob Bennett, was a legend in this state. Our former national committeeman, Mike Colley, who served as a Franklin County Republican Party chairman. We've lost members of Congress, Mike Oxley and Del Latta, and now Senator Voinovich. And it's kind of made me realize that this is our show now. This is our responsibility now. And in jobs like mine as the state party chairman, where we're supposed to be focused on winning campaigns, I think we also really need to make sure that we have an eye toward finding those people who are more like George Voinovich, who are more like the people who want to serve the public, because as he used to say, one of his famous lines, Steve George knows this very well, you do your job well and the politics will take care of themselves. And that really is more of what we ought to be looking for, and probably a little bit too much of what we're lacking in today's political environment.
Let me pick up on that. I wasn't where I was going to go, but how do you view that, especially now in a retrospective mode? How have politics changed? Have we become more celebrity-oriented, more social media-oriented? How do you translate some of that old politics of character to the modern cut and thrust of politics today? Or can you? Have we lost a sort of generation of politicians forever because we can't replicate that in our current environment?
No, I think we need to make sure that we do replicate it, that we can't concede that it has been lost forever just because of one cycle. And this has been an interesting experience. Now, you mentioned that there were a lot of candidates running on the Republican side. There were 17 of us, actually, 17 candidates. The Ohio Republican Party was fortunate enough to host the first debate of all those Republican hopefuls back in Cleveland, back in August of last year. And there's an old adage in football, and you're in the presence of one of the great football factories of the United States, if not, well, certainly of the world, at The Ohio State University, with great, rich football. We're actually in the Archie Griffin ballroom right now, one of Columbus native and football's only two-time Heisman Trophy winner, I'll point out. But there's an old adage in the sport that if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. Because if you're one of those teams that plays two quarterbacks, it means that there wasn't one guy who stepped up and took control of the job and was the person that you're going to rely on to be your quarterback. What I didn't think of when I walked into the building on August 6th of last year was that when we had 17 candidates, it really meant we didn't have a candidate. And we were going to have to go through a process unlike any that we had experienced, certainly in many of our political lives, The Democrats always had their candidate. And I know Hillary got a good run from Bernie Sanders, but she was propped up from the beginning by hundreds of superdelegates, and that we don't have those on our side. That always made her seem like a little bit of a fait accompli nominee for their side. And lo and behold, that's how it worked out. And maybe it was a little bit tougher for her to get through than she thought against a socialist, but she made it, and she was their nominee. She was always going to be their nominee. We really couldn't decide who we thought the front runner at the time was, and but by the time that debate came around, they put the candidates on stage, and your order on the stage was based on where you were in the poll. Donald Trump was leading in the polling back then, and I think we all thought it was a kind of a blip on the radar. It wouldn't last. It was more because people weren't familiar with the other candidates yet, and he had high name ID because he was a celebrity and whatnot. As we got deeper and deeper into the process, he had some staying power. I know that we did a lot of polling and focus grouping in New Hampshire when Governor Kasich was a candidate there, and what we found in talking to Trump supporters, and Donald Trump ended up winning New Hampshire, Governor Kasich finished second, was they were really responding to two things that they liked about Donald Trump. And this I think, was important for us, an important takeaway for us for the future, where we're going to go here. They liked the fact that he tells it like it is, and anymore, I think, politicians, not just in the U.S., but all over the world, are viewed as telling people what they want to hear instead of telling it like it is. And the second thing was that he's not bought and paid for by special interests. And once he was able to make that connection, that emotional connection to voters, he was right when he said he could say anything. In fact, I think his quote was he could walk down the street, he could walk down Fifth Avenue in New York City and shoot someone, and it wouldn't change his vote. He knew that he was correct about that, and he was. Because look at some of the outlandish things that he's said and done since then, and his numbers have really only improved. So he was able to make a visceral connection with voters on two issues that they really fundamentally, truly cared about and thought had been lost in the shuffle of what's happening in American politics today. And so what I think we need to do is we need to take the good lessons from this experience and try to make sure that candidates in the future have heard that, are hearing voters, are understanding that there is this tremendous frustration, that it doesn't sound like people who are running for office mean what they say. They say things to get elected, then they get elected, and they do something very different. And people are tired of it. People want their government to work. They don't understand why Washington appears to be broken. I think Congress right now has something around a 7 or 8% approval rating. By the time you're down that low, it's really just family members and staff that are saying they like the job that you're doing, and probably not all of them. Because then everybody else pretty much unanimously agrees that what's happening in Washington just doesn't work. And what we get, unfortunately, cycle after cycle after cycle, is more of the same. And instead of just focusing on what we need to do to win more elections than the other side, which is what we do, I think we also now need to focus on making sure we get people in public office, people like Governor Kasich, people like Senator Voinovich. And it's no coincidence, in my opinion, that those two people are Ohioans, because of what it takes to win here and the kind of appeal that you have to have across the spectrum. John Kasich won his re-election in Ohio in 2014 by carrying 86 of 88 counties. George Voinovich won his historic re-election in 1994 by carrying all 88 counties, getting 72% of the vote here. That is very, very hard to do. It's hard to get 72% of Ohioans to agree that the sky is blue, but they agreed that George Voinovich was the candidate they wanted to continue to serve in office. No candidate for any office in Ohio history ever has received as many as 3 million votes from Ohioans in an election, including those that were running for president, except for George Voinovich, who in 2004, the last campaign he ever run and won, he got 3.5 million votes in that election. And no one else has even ever gotten to 3 million. So he was wildly popular for a reason, And I think the things that successful political figures in Ohio have learned is that you really have to have that broad appeal. You have to have that willingness to work across the aisle. You have to have that willingness to not always say, well, this is what I should do because I'm a conservative or because I'm a Democrat or what have you. Know, you've got to be able to work through issues and help solve problems. And that's why I think John Kasich would have been such a great candidate for president. Because bringing that approach, that Ohio approach, to the national level is exactly what we would need to not only fix this country, but start to bring some healing to our political process.
One of the things, if Iowa is known for, I don't know, corn subsidies, and we go to New Hampshire, we talk about town hall meetings and the retail politics, one of the things that comes up in Ohio all the time is trade. And trade was a big issue in the 2008 election. Famously, President Obama, candidate Obama, and candidate Clinton battled over NAFTA in that race and gave some Canadians some fits over whether we were committed to NAFTA. And this year, we seem to be in also a very tough debate about trade. And for a country that is our largest trading partner, you know, it's a worrying sign. What do you think the politics of Ohio, let alone the country, are on trade now? And with the TPP on the horizon, with NAFTA now 20 years plus, where are we going?
We have to be in a situation where markets are open to American products, and if we aren't, then we're not doing the best thing for the American economy. And so that if you're going to look at it just from a very insular point of view, sometimes those concepts are a little bit challenging to grasp, especially when we live in a state where a lot of industrial jobs have disappeared, and they are never coming back. What has happened in the steel industry, what is happening right now to the coal industry in Ohio, not directly necessarily related to trade, but certainly related to some international issues that we have going on, are scary. And in a grand concept of what global trade ought to look like and how free markets really ultimately help you build an economy for the new century, kind of fall flat in a place like Youngstown, where manufacturing jobs, which were really great for a lot of people's families, are gone and they're never coming back. Steel jobs and whatnot. You can pick out just about any, you're in the Toddlin town of Ohio right now in Columbus. Other cities, other major metropolitan areas from Toledo and Dayton and Cleveland and Canton and Akron, those places are hurting. We're really the place that's booming and growing because they've had a real hit to them on, you could GM in Dayton and Republic Steel and other places in Cleveland. It's been a real challenge for us, and these were things that some people were predicting would happen when NAFTA was signed, and then they did happen. And so it isn't hard to be drawn to a candidate who says, enough, no more. We'll make the Chinese pay for this, and when they do, these jobs will come back, and you'll have the good old days, and remember what it was like when the economy was booming, and Youngstown was the 4th largest city in Ohio. And it's just not like that anymore. So it's been a message that's had some appeal, certainly in a place like Ohio, because Ohio has suffered. Ohio has been hurt by this. Now, what we have had to do, what we've been kind of dragged kicking and screaming into doing, is to look for the jobs of the 21st century, look for the sectors that we can expand in, not cry over the spilled milk of what's happened in the past. If we're going to be in a global economy with global markets, there's going to be issues of competition that are going to impact how those things are proceed moving forward, and that's what our governor and the real leaders in this state have attempted to focus on and tried to do. But it's certainly understandable why the other point of view has had some appeal and had some ability to resonate with voters here in Ohio. So I think we need to keep moving forward and continue to do the things we can do. We've got a terrific example of a Chinese company who's come to Dayton to build a car, an auto manufacturer and auto parts in Fuyao. And those are the kinds of success stories that we can continue to talk about if we open up markets and if we continue to work hard to attract those kinds of jobs to the United States, then we can benefit just as much from those kinds of free trade environments. And it's just a tougher argument to make with voters, as you understand, than it is what we're hearing right now, which is you lost your job because they put big tariffs on what they import from us. We allow them to import everything that they want to without any tariffs. And, well, if we slap a tariff on them, then everything will be fixed. Well, that's unfortunately not really how it works. Yeah. But it sounds really good.
We're here on a college campus, and I come from one as well. And I wonder if you could say something about the millennial voters. There are as many millennial voters, if they show up this year, as there are baby boomers. And the world looks different to them. The economy that they're inheriting looks different. How do you find Ohioans of that generation are in terms of their outlook, of what they're looking for from government and the role of it? And we certainly see Bernie Sanders picking up a lot of their support. Is that a true reflection, or is there more to it? What's your view?
Well, I think the good old days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill battling it out in public, but privately being friends and making sure that they got what they needed to get done, and the old adage of someone who's my friend 80% of the time is with me 80% of the time is my friend. I think we don't realize how long ago those days were. Millennials don't remember those days. They weren't around for those days. Everything that they've seen in their lives in terms of what's happened in politics has been this environment that we've been in for the last 20 years or so or more, where neither side gets along. They get very stratified. They only worry about their primary elections. They don't really worry too much about appealing to voters across the spectrum, and they retreat into their corners. And we're seeing that right now with some issues that are happening on the front pages of papers even today, where if you're a Democrat, you have to be on this side of this issue. If you're a Republican, you have to be on that side of the issue. There's no willingness to talk to each other about some common ground to move forward to solve problems, and all voters see is that, okay, another thing that we're going to bicker over and disagree over and retreat into our corners and not look for some sort of way forward. And so millennials are frustrated. And not only Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump was getting a pretty decent percentage of millennial voters, and actually there are more millennials than baby boomers now. They're the largest percentage of our population and potentially our voting population. They don't vote as often, and they're not as reliable. But as they start to become the generation that really takes over this process, maybe that's how we can start to bring some sanity back to the process, because they may just say, hey, enough is enough. The way that things are going now in terms of the partisan rancor is, like I said, it's all they've ever seen. And understandably, they're frustrated and looking for a different path forward. Someone at some point in time is going to give that to them. It was almost Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. And of course, that's going to be a very powerful message to folks who are just frustrated and confused by how this process is even supposed to work.
I have a slightly different question, but it's for our Master of Ceremonies, Dan. Can I ask? Yeah. Well, I was going to say, should I ask the audience to chip in here? I feel terrible because I keep monopolizing the conversation. All right. So here's what we're going to do. With some help, if you could, we probably won't catch it on the recording, but just if we could take a couple of questions, if you have any for Mr. Borges, we'd be glad to do that. Just this popcorn round. Just jump up if you have a question. What's going on, sir?
Your assessment of Donald Trump's appeal, I think, is spot on. I don't know if the self-funding aspect of it is as big a deal because I don't know how wealthy he really is, and whether he's really spending his own money.
There's a young lady with a microphone.
Like it is a very
Yes.
Telling it like it is, why weren't there more candidates out there from outside the establishment that could take on this concept of throw political correctness aside and let's deal with the real facts and where that leads us? Why, it seems to me, it would have been a very easy philosophy for outsiders to jump on. Was the Republican establishment not really opening itself up to outsiders to enter the race and just got stuck with Donald Trump?
Before you answer that, are there any other questions you want to jump in? There's a gentleman here. We'll get to all of them at once.
Great discussion. So first of all, thank you. Matt, just to maybe softball, maybe not so much of a softball question, but why should, two parts, why should a regular Republican voter vote for your nominee for president, given some of the statements? And why should independent vote for Donald Trump for president, given some of his statements? I'm, as a Republican, more interested in hearing the first part, but I wanted to ask for both. So.
Well, to take the first question, the question was, Donald Trump has had this appeal for telling it like it is. Why weren't there more folks in the race that were willing to do that? Well, I think there was one. He might not have gotten as many of the questions during the debates and got as much coverage as others did, but we all, Ben Kanzig knows this very well, we all laughed when people were calling John Kasich an establishment candidate. I mean, talk about someone who has never been part of the establishment, ever. He's taken on the establishment. He wrote budgets when he was in Washington against his own party's president. He fought hard to make sure that the budget got balanced, got that done. Balanced budget. He balanced the federal budget. I said before, I've said Republican mayor of Cleveland. We may see another Republican mayor of Cleveland before we see another balanced federal budget. And so to be able to work for years to put the team together to get that sort of thing done, it wasn't just the other party's feathers that he was ruffling in order to do that. And even here in Ohio, he's worked across the aisle on things like sentencing reform, on Medicaid reform, on a number of issues, Cleveland schools plan, and other things that needed to be done that weren't just Republican dogma, weren't just conservative points of view. It was a get things done kind of spirit. And I also, just for a quick moment, I still don't know what the Republican establishment is. I don't know what that word means.
It should include you.
Of course it does. I'm the card-carrying member of the establishment. But I guess if you stood up on that stage and you had governor or senator or something next to your name, you were perceived in some ways, in some circles, as part of the problem. And so when someone like Donald Trump, one of the criticisms of him 20 years ago, we would have said, well, the guy's never held elective office before. And I think voters this time were saying the thing they liked about him is that he'd never held elective office before. And it made it sort of a challenging. But I think part of your question speaks to something that is very correct. We didn't see this coming as a party. We didn't. I defy you to find a person who would say that, oh, yeah, I knew this was exactly what was going to happen. We just didn't see it. We weren't tapped in enough to what was happening out there in the culture, in the environment, in our own party's electorate to have a good enough sense for what was moving forward. We can't ever get caught with our unprepared for that again, and maybe we shouldn't have been surprised at how it turned out, but I can tell you a year ago I did not think I'd be sitting here talking about Donald Trump as our nominee. I just didn't. Now, why to vote for him? Look, I think you do have to look at some of the good aspects of what he's brought to the party. We have 1 million more registered Republicans today in Ohio than we had prior to this election. He lost Ohio's primary, but he still got more votes in his side of the primary than Hillary Clinton did. Again, she's a very unpopular figure. If what people are looking for, if what the voters are clamoring for, if they're telling us in droves, in record numbers, is that they want something different and some kind of change, the last person in the universe who can bring anything different to Washington is Hillary Clinton, who's lived there for 25 years and been part of the problem. Now, you never want to run a campaign saying, vote for my guy because the other person is so much worse, but there are opportunities for for Donald Trump as a candidate to really capitalize on what it is that he's tapped into. Like, he's missed a few of those opportunities now, and he can't continue to miss them. But you know, there are so many things that are going on right now that expose this administration for their failures, for their inability to recognize and deal with problems that are facing this country. And some of the things, some of the straight talk, I guess, some of the unfiltered talk you get from Donald Trump, some of those ideas aren't really all that bad. I don't want to go through this election and have to be pinioned to every comment that he's made about Muslim bans and building walls and all that. And of course, that's what the media and what a lot of folks want. If you even say you're going to help their campaign get organized here, oh, well, then you must be for the Muslim ban. Well, you know, no. But at the same time, I looked at the potential nominations that he's put out, the 10 people he said he would at least consider for Supreme Court justices, and every single one of them would be better than anyone Hillary Clinton would nominate, in my opinion. Talk about something that could really change the direction of this country and our culture for the next generation. At the same time, I think we have to work hard to keep people like Rob Portman in the United States Senate and turn out our voters, and then focus on those things that help unite us and bring us together as a party and as a country. And if we do that, saving the world from Hillary Clinton won't be such a bad thing, trust me. So we can continue to work on that and develop that moving forward, but I just want Republicans to show up and vote. I figure if I get a Republican to the polls this year, I'll take my chances. I've done my job. We'll win more than we lose, and we'll just have to end up seeing what happens with the top of the ticket. There's only one person who can affect that decision moving forward, and that person is Donald Trump. He's the only one. If he decides to embrace a message and come back toward us, take a few steps toward us over the next several months, then I think he'll win this election. I think he'll win it going away. If he doesn't, then he probably won't win, and maybe he shouldn't.
Matt Borges, I have to say, I grew up in Michigan, and you know, we're rivals. The one thing I always knew about Ohio is that people here have big hearts. And I think even though this is a partisan discussion, that was the way it was designed, and so it gets some hackles up. I think what came through is just how much you care about Ohio, about people, and about character. And politics needs more people like you, if you ask me. So thank you very much. All join us. Thank you very much for your time.